Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 80 years since my grandfather, King George VI, announced to the nation.
This moment wasn't planned, nor rehearsed. When Princess Anne and King Charles stood together to deliver their private truth, silence swept through the palace. It was as if centuries of royal decorum collapsed in a heartbeat. The siblings, always composed, always distant from public spectacle, now stood at the precipice of a truth they could no longer silence. This wasn't a press conference or a formal statement. It was something heavier, something sacred, a moment born not of political strategy or public pressure, but of personal reckoning. In hushed tones and steady gazes, Anne and Charles, two pillars of the British monarchy, finally looked the world in the eye and admitted there was something the crown had hidden for far too long. This wasn't just any confession. This was the kind of admission that rewrote relationships, that reshaped how the public viewed the monarchy's deepest bonds. Anne, often known as the most dutiful and least dramatic royal, and Charles, the sovereign who weathered scandal after scandal, had finally chosen to lift the veil. Why now? Why together? What weight had built so steadily over the decades that it could no longer be carried in silence? The shock wasn't just in the words they said, but in who was saying them. Anne and Charles have rarely, if ever, shared such emotional transparency. These are not figures given to emotional display, and yet here they were, bound by something deeper than duty, bound by history, regret, and a need to honor a past that had long been reshaped for public comfort. Their tone was steady, but their message rattled the very walls of Buckingham Palace. This wasn't some political formality. This was raw. This was personal. The confession pointed to something far bigger than a single moment of truth. It hinted at years of concealed history, the kind of personal pain that can't be erased with titles or crowns. The nation watched, holding its collective breath. Commentators scrambled to frame the announcement, yet none could capture the emotional weight it carried. What could possibly drive these two lifelong royals to unite so dramatically? The question echoed louder than the confession itself. And in that mystery lay the beginning of a story that was never meant to reach the public eye. Because this wasn't just about the present. This was about what had been lost long ago, choices made in silence, and hearts that broke behind palace doors. The monarchy, for all its pageantry and power, is ultimately held together by people flawed, emotional, human. And now, two of its strongest had finally admitted they had carried this burden long enough. This revelation was not a scandal. It was not a public attack. It was a reckoning one that rewinds the clock and dares to confront the hidden wounds of royal history. But the truth they exposed didn't begin in this room. It began decades ago with a love that defied the rules and a heartbreak that never healed. To understand what they've finally revealed, we must rewind to a hidden romance buried deep in royal memory. Before scandal and duty took center stage, Anne quietly fell for a man the crown could never accept. In the early 1970s, long before tabloids swarmed the gates and the world dissected every royal gesture, there existed a pocket of innocence within palace walls. It was here that Princess Anne, disciplined, loyal, fiercely composed, allowed herself to feel something dangerously human. His name was Andrew Parker Bowles, and to the outside world, he was just another charismatic officer in the British Army. But to Anne, he was something else entirely, a moment of rebellion wrapped in charm, a man who saw her not as a royal symbol, but as a woman with laughter in her voice and warmth in her eyes. Their relationship wasn't staged for the cameras. There were no official declarations, no formal announcements. But within the tightly guarded circles of the monarchy, whispers floated like smoke. Whispers of stolen glances, of private dinners, of a bond too genuine to be faked. Andrew wasn't just a fleeting companion, he understood Anne in a way few dared. He was witty, self-assured, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made her feel, perhaps for the first time, like she didn't have to be a princess. She could just be Anne. But even the most sincere love stories falter under the crushing weight of tradition. And in this one, it wasn't scandal that tore them apart, it was religion. Andrew was a devout Catholic, and Anne, bound by Protestant lineage and royal protocol, stood on the opposite side of an invisible but immovable wall. The monarchy, at the time, did not permit a Protestant royal to marry a Catholic. It wasn't about public opinion or family disgrace, it was about centuries of deeply ingrained rules. Rules that didn't care about affection, didn't yield to compatibility, and certainly didn't bow to love. Anne didn't protest. She didn't run. She chose duty. because that's what she was raised to do. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was heartbreak cloaked in composure. Behind closed doors, she bore the emotional fallout like a soldier, refusing to let the cracks show. No interviews, no diary leaks, no tell-all glances, just quiet resolve. And yet, those closest to her say she was never quite the same after him. Her laughter dulled, her steps more precise. Anne, the stoic princess of public life, had buried a private love so deep it would echo for decades. The irony? The very man she was forbidden to marry would soon become the husband of another woman, Camilla Shand. And that name would one day set the monarchy ablaze. Anne stepped aside, but the past never truly left, because the man she loved soon married someone who'd spark a royal revolution. Anne lost a lover. Camilla gained a husband, but neither expected what would come next. In 1973, the wedding bells rang not for the princess, but for the woman who would rewrite the monarchy's emotional legacy. Camilla Shand became Mrs. Andrew Parker Bowles, and with that union, a quietly smoldering chapter began to ignite beneath the polished veneer of royal tradition. On the surface, it was a conventional match, two individuals from the same aristocratic circles, finally formalizing what had long seemed inevitable. But within the palace walls, the air was thick with irony. Camilla hadn't just married a man, she'd married Anne's past, and unknowingly, she'd positioned herself at the very center of the monarchy's most volatile love triangle. As Camilla settled into married life, another heart watched from the sidelines. Prince Charles, Anne's brother, the heir to the throne, had been drawn to Camilla with a quiet intensity that caught even the most seasoned courtiers off guard. His fascination wasn't just infatuation, it was a connection that ran dangerously deep. Charles admired her earthiness, her wit, her refusal to bow to royal rigidity. But the timing was never in their favor. The palace machinery, driven by image and inheritance, deemed Camilla unsuitable. She lacked the innocence, the pedigree, the pliability expected of a future queen. And so, just as his feelings bloomed, Charles was gently but firmly steered away. The heartbreak was private, but the consequences would ripple outward for decades. Camilla moved forward in her marriage to Andrew, while Charles, obedient to the expectations of crown and country, turned toward a future crafted more by obligation than affection. But his feelings never truly disappeared. They simply went underground, simmering in private letters, secret meetings, and a longing that would never fully be extinguished. What no one anticipated was how the crown would eventually circle back. That Camilla, once cast aside, once married to Anne's former love, would rise again, not just in Charles's heart, but within the very institution that had once deemed her unworthy. This was no fairy tale. This was a web of human flaws, of choices made under pressure, and of hearts pulled in opposing directions. With each passing year, Camilla's role evolved from outsider to confidant, from shadowy presence to central figure. And as the future king struggled with a public marriage and a private truth, Camilla's name crept closer to history's main stage. Anne, ever composed, watched from a distance. She had long let go of Andrew, but the entanglements he brought with him remained. Her silence wasn't indifference, it was survival. She knew better than anyone how love could collide with royal expectations, how personal sacrifices were swallowed by the demands of duty. But even she could not have foreseen that the woman who once took her place at Andrew's side would one day stand beside her brother as queen. As Camilla moved into the spotlight, Princess Anne remained quietly steadfast, but her silence hid storms. While others courted scandal, Anne built an empire of respect through silence and service. For decades, while headlines splashed the faces of her siblings across tabloids, while scandal danced around the royal family like wildfire, Princess Anne remained the steady flame, never flickering, never fading. She didn't need flashy titles or attention-grabbing speeches. Her strength came in constancy, in an unshakable devotion to duty that not even time could erode. While others stumbled through marriages, interviews, and controversy, Anne rose every morning with the same determined clarity. The monarchy would not falter on her watch. She became the monarchy's steel spine, the invisible weight-bearer beneath its golden crown. But even iron has its fractures. Behind Anne's tightly guarded composure lived an unspoken tension, one that took shape as Camilla's presence within the royal family grew more permanent. It was never about jealousy. Anne was far too pragmatic for petty rivalry. It was about principle. Camilla hadn't just married Anne's former love, she was now entwined with Anne's brother, stepping into a space that Anne believed should be occupied by dignity, tradition, and unrelenting service. And Camilla, despite her charm and effort, hadn't walked the same path of sacrifice. The public never saw the rift. There were no harsh words, no exchanged glances that could fuel tabloid flames. Anne understood the power of optics. But insiders noticed what the public missed: the quiet distance, the cool courtesy, the way Anne's warm composure stiffened ever so slightly in Camilla's presence. She didn't protest the growing bond between Charles and Camilla. She didn't question the legitimacy of their love. But she couldn't ignore what it meant to the institution, to the family, to everything she had worked so hard to preserve. And when Charles and Camilla finally married in 2005, the monarchy presented a united front. Smiles, waves, tradition perfectly orchestrated. But within Anne, something shifted. This wasn't a union she could celebrate with ease. Not because of Charles, but because of what Camilla represented. The rewriting of royal legacy through compromise, the bending of rules she had lived her entire life obeying. While the world debated whether Camilla deserved her place beside the future king, Anne didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Still, Anne remained loyal to her brother. She never undermined him, never challenged his choices in public or private. But she never fully embraced the woman who now stood where her own history once lingered. For Anne, duty meant sacrifice. For Camilla, it had always seemed more like strategy. That quiet dissonance, unspoken but undeniable, created a ripple through every shared appearance, every formal event, every moment where tradition and transformation were forced to coexist. Anne endured it all with the same discipline that defined her legacy. But even the most composed royals have moments when the mask slips, when the storm within can no longer be contained behind smiles and ceremony. And for Anne, that moment came not in words, but in action. Then, one moment shattered that composed surface, a royal protocol so subtle yet deafening in silence. She didn't yell, she didn't object. She simply refused to bow, and the palace heard it loud and clear. It happened in an instant, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. But within the palace, where gestures speak louder than proclamations, it was a seismic shift. Princess Anne, the monarch's most disciplined and unwavering servant, stood face to face with Queen Camilla. The moment called for a simple tradition, a curtsy, expected of all, regardless of personal opinion. But Anne didn't bend. Not her knees, not her head, not her principles. It was a pause so brief it could have been missed entirely, yet it echoed louder than any royal declaration. In that split second, Anne delivered her verdict, not with words, but with silence. This wasn't defiance in the way the tabloids often craved. There was no public feud, no confrontation, no explosive exchange. But Anne's refusal to curtsy was no oversight. It was intentional, calculated, deeply symbolic. For Anne, who had spent her entire life upholding tradition, this subtle breach wasn't an act of rebellion. It was a statement about legacy, about honor, about what it truly means to serve the crown. Because to her, titles are not enough. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And in Anne's eyes, Camilla had not yet earned it. The monarchy had shifted dramatically over the decades. Old rules had been rewritten to accommodate new narratives. But for Anne, some things remained sacred chief among them, the unspoken code of merit. Camilla may have worn the crown, but Anne knew the cost of the throne. She had lived it. She had sacrificed for it. And now, standing across from the woman who married her former love and reshaped royal destiny, Anne could no longer conceal the quiet storm that brewed beneath her polished exterior. Royal watchers pounced on the moment. Was it a protest? Was it personal? Or was it simply an accident in a day filled with ceremonial detail? The palace gave no answer. But those who knew Anne best understood she didn't make such moves lightly. This wasn't about personal bitterness or old wounds. It was about principle, about watching the fabric of royal responsibility fray as the lines between duty and image blurred. For Anne, who had spent her life earning every ounce of her reputation, Camilla's ascension felt like a shortcut through a system built on sacrifice. Yet even in this act of unspoken resistance, Anne didn't abandon her role. She still fulfilled every duty. She still stood beside Camilla in public, but she also reminded the world subtly, powerfully, that not all crowns carry equal weight. Some are inherited, some are earned, and some, in the eyes of those who've given everything to the monarchy, are worn too soon. It was one gesture, but it told a story decades in the making. Yet behind every tension is a bond, the one between brother and sister, forged through decades of royal shadows. Before they were monarch and princess, they were children chasing dreams through palace gardens. Long before duty carved them into symbols of tradition, before the weight of the crown forged their identities, Charles and Anne were simply brother and sister, two children growing up in a world more gilded than gentle. Born just 21 months apart, they were each other's first allies in a palace often too cold and too distant for affection. Their parents, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, were not unloving, but they were dutiful, and duty often came before bedtime stories. In those early years, it was not the warmth of parental arms that shaped them, but the quiet companionship they found in each other. They shared toys, tutors, and spaces that echoed with the silence of royal discipline. When their parents were away on royal tours or state visits, it was Anne and Charles who filled the void. Their bond didn't come from softness, it was forged in structure, in knowing they were being raised not just to live, but to represent. But even amid protocol, they found small rebellions. Laughter in hallways, jokes whispered behind closed doors, and dreams, secret ones, of what life might have been if they hadn't been born into history. That childhood bond didn't vanish with age. If anything, it only deepened. While their roles diverged, Charles groomed for kingship, Anne for relentless service, their connection remained unshaken. Anne, ever the pragmatist, and Charles, the introspective visionary, balanced each other. She steadied him, he softened her, and through all the decades of scandal, reinvention, and public scrutiny, they held firm to that original promise made in childhood. No matter what came, they would remain each other's constants. It was never clearer than during Charles's coronation. As the cameras rolled and the world watched a new monarch rise, it wasn't just gold and crowns that spoke volumes. It was a simple moment, unscripted and deeply personal. Anne spotted her brother in the corridor and, with a mischievous grin, called out, "Hello, old bean." It was a line not meant for the cameras, not for ceremony. It was a flash of their childhood, a secret language that cut through the noise. And in that moment, the world didn't see a king and a princess. It saw a brother and sister, still bound by those early, sacred years. Their shared passions also tethered them through time. Horses were more than a royal pastime. They were a legacy passed down from Queen Elizabeth herself. Charles threw himself into polo with the intensity of someone chasing freedom. Anne, meanwhile, charged into the world of competitive riding with fierce determination, becoming the first royal to compete in the Olympics. Together, they spoke in a language of reins and saddles, of early mornings and quiet victories. Even gardening, a hobby picked up in the palace's more private corners, offered them moments of peace away from the scrutiny, grounded in soil and sunlight. At the coronation, Anne's role as gold stick in waiting was more than ceremonial. It was a symbol of trust, of protection, of unwavering loyalty. She wasn't just a figure in robes, she was the person Charles knew he could count on then, now, always. But love, even one built over a lifetime, cannot shield against every wound. And while Anne would always defend her brother, some shadows cannot be denied. But even bonds as strong as theirs can't stop the rising storm, because Camilla's shadow stretches farther than anyone imagined. She wasn't born for this crown, but she's worn it with a quiet war inside her eyes. Camilla never entered the palace through a grand archway of applause. Her arrival was clouded by whispers, her name laced with scandal, her image shaped by shadows. She was the woman who had stood beside Charles long before she was ever meant to, and far before the world was ready to accept her. For years, she lingered on the margins of royal life, framed by the loss of Princess Diana and a public still mourning its beloved fairy tale. But Camilla didn't flinch. She endured. She worked, brick by brick, to build a new identity from the ruins of one that had once made her the most criticized woman in Britain. In the aftermath of Diana's death, Camilla became the embodiment of restraint. She didn't demand the spotlight. Instead, she turned to service. Charitable work became her quiet campaign. She championed literacy, women's health, and domestic abuse awareness, not as a publicity stunt, but as a steady climb toward redemption. Slowly, the public softened. The rage turned to reluctance. The reluctance, eventually, to tolerance. Still, acceptance remained elusive. Unlike others born into royalty, Camilla had to justify every step she took, every ribbon she cut, every speech she gave. Her crown was not inherited. It was earned on terms shaped by loss, comparison, and unrelenting scrutiny. But there was one person whose approval was harder to win than the public's: Princess Anne. While Camilla worked to rehabilitate her image, Anne stood as the gold standard of royal service, relentless, dutiful, unquestioned. For Anne, royalty was not performance, it was purpose. A daily grind, not a grand pageant. And in Camilla, she saw not an equal, but an anomaly. Someone who hadn't endured the long haul. Someone whose past cast shadows too long to ignore. It was during a private palace meeting that the tension surfaced. Anne, calm and unflinching, didn't attack Camilla personally. But her words cut with surgical precision. A queen consort, she said, must be more than a title. She must serve. She must be tireless. She must show the nation that her crown rests on sacrifice, not sentiment. Camilla, seated across from her, said little. She didn't argue. She didn't retreat, but in her eyes burned the quiet understanding that Anne's expectations were not unjustified. Camilla had chosen this life, and with it, the burden to prove herself again and again. For Camilla, this was never just a struggle for status. It was a battle for legitimacy. Every nod of respect, every newspaper headline that didn't question her role, every moment she wasn't compared to Diana or dismissed as Anne's contrast, each was a victory, hard won. And yet, deep down, she knew some hearts might never fully turn in her favor. Not because she hadn't tried, but because some stories are too deeply etched into the public memory to rewrite. But Anne's doubts aren't hers alone. Another princess, younger and beloved, also stands in contrast to the queen. Wherever Catherine walks, the crowd follows. And Camilla feels that shadow growing. Catherine wasn't born into royalty. She didn't inherit her title, nor was she sculpted by centuries of noble bloodlines. She was a commoner, a university student who fell in love with a prince, and yet, what she brought to the monarchy wasn't ordinary. It was transformative. From the moment she stepped into the public eye, the world didn't just watch it, embraced her. Her elegance felt authentic, her warmth, natural. There was no need to force admiration. It simply flowed. While the monarchy struggled to modernize, Catherine became its most valuable asset, a new generation's princess of the people. But Catherine didn't just smile for the cameras. She rolled up her sleeves. Mental health, early childhood development, and family well-being became the pillars of her public mission. She visited schools not for show, but to listen. She championed parenting causes, not because they were safe, but because they were necessary. And in doing so, she created something rare, a royal figure who felt accessible, yet still dignified. The line between princess and person began to blur, and the public leaned in, eager for more. Camilla, on the other hand, had to climb a steeper path. While she worked diligently behind the scenes, supporting charities, making appearances, fulfilling her role, the comparisons were relentless. No matter how far she'd come from her scandal-shadowed past, Catherine's effortless ascent only highlighted Camilla's burdens. Where Catherine dazzled naturally, Camilla had to prove herself again and again. Where Catherine's every outfit turned into a fashion trend, Camilla's engagements were often met with muted headlines. The contrast was glaring, and Camilla knew it. Their joint appearances became a study in royal tension. There were no overt clashes, no pointed snubs, but something subtle lingered beneath the surface, an imbalance too pronounced to ignore. Catherine would step into a room and draw every camera. Camilla would follow, poised but subdued. And the public, without malice, made its choice clear. In Catherine, they saw the future of the monarchy, young, composed, compassionate. In Camilla, they saw the past trying to catch up. Yet even in the face of this quiet rivalry, there was a strange respect. Camilla never tried to outshine Catherine. She couldn't. And Catherine, with her natural charm, never gloated. She didn't have to. Her popularity wasn't a weapon, it was a byproduct of who she was. But within the palace walls, the dynamic was undeniable. Two women, two different legacies. One monarchy slowly being reshaped by one, and still clinging to validation for the other. With two women defining the future, and tradition colliding with transformation, the crown hangs in balance. This isn't just Anne and Camilla's conflict. It's the monarchy's reckoning what kind of crown survives the modern age. As the royal family moves forward under the reign of King Charles III, it's not merely a shift of leadership, it's a pivotal test of legacy. At the heart of the palace, behind every ceremonial wave and carefully rehearsed appearance, lies a deeper struggle. What values will define the crown as it stands on the edge of a new era? For Charles and Anne, this isn't just about maintaining appearances. It's about safeguarding the soul of the monarchy itself. Sibling by birth, but partners in purpose, they have long understood the weight of tradition, the cost of duty, and the fragility of public faith. Camilla, now queen consort, embodies the path of transformation, one built on controversy, resilience, and constant reinvention. Her journey wasn't polished or pristine. It was layered in scandal, heartbreak, and redemption. And yet, despite everything, she climbed the steps of history and stood beside the crown. Her rise is proof that the monarchy can bend, adapt, and even forgive. But to Anne, bending too far threatens to break something sacred. She is the anchor, the unyielding force of tradition. For decades, she has served without scandal, without complaint. In Anne's eyes, royalty is not something you enter through popularity. It's something you earn through pain, perseverance, and purpose. Then there's Catherine, the wild card in this royal equation. She's not just the face of modern royalty. She's the bridge between legacy and future. Where Camilla fought her way in, and Anne held the line from within, Catherine represents something rare. A princess who was embraced by the public and raised by it into symbolic royalty. She brings grace without rigidity, compassion without compromise. And in her, many see not just the future queen, but the future itself. In their confession, Charles and Anne weren't just revealing a personal truth, they were issuing a warning that if the monarchy continues to drift without anchoring itself to real values, it risks becoming nothing more than a ceremonial relic. Their alliance was not one of gossip or scandal, but of legacy, of reminding the world that behind every crown, there must be character. Behind every royal decree, there must be discipline. And behind every face that graces the palace balcony, there must be service that justifies the honor. This final revelation was never about Camilla or Catherine alone. It was about what their paths say about the institution. Can the crown survive as both a symbol of time-honored tradition and a mirror to modern expectations? Can it carry centuries of history while welcoming new blood and fresh ideals? Or will it fracture under the pressure of contradiction? Because what Charles and Anne declared without pomp, without spin, was simple but profound. The monarchy cannot delay its reckoning any longer. It must decide who it truly serves, and what kind of legacy it wishes to leave behind. And in that decision lies the fate of the royal future. This is the battle behind the palace walls. What do you believe the crown should represent? Comment below. Like, subscribe, and join us in unveiling the truths they no longer want hidden.